She walked out of that courthouse with $43, no car, and a life in pieces. He landed in a helicopter worth more than her entire neighborhood. Nobody expected those two worlds to collide in a parking lot on the hottest Tuesday of the year. Nobody expected what she would do next, not for herself, but for a stranger, while her own world was still burning. What happened between Declan Ashford and Mara Bennett didn't begin with attraction or ambition. It began with a woman choosing someone else's crisis over her own. And that one choice? It cracked open everything. If this story already has you hooked, hit like and drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Now settle in, because this one goes deep. The courthouse parking lot on Meridian Avenue smelled like hot asphalt and cigarette smoke. The kind of smell that clings to bad days and refuses to leave. It was August, the brutal kind. The air sitting heavy and wet against every surface. The sun doing nothing subtle about its cruelty. Mara Bennett pushed through the glass doors at 11:47 in the morning and stood on the top step, blinking. She didn't cry. She'd used up her crying somewhere around the fourth hour inside that courtroom, watching her ex-husband's attorney dismantle 6 years of her life with the calm, practiced efficiency of someone who did this before lunch every other Tuesday. She stood on those courthouse steps with a manila folder tucked under one arm and her purse strap cutting into her shoulder, and she did the only thing left to do. She breathed. In, out. Her left shoe had a blister forming near the heel. She'd walked 12 blocks to get here because Marcus had taken the car. Not legally, not yet, but he'd taken it 2 weeks before the hearing and dared her to make an issue of it. She hadn't. She'd picked her battles, and the battle over a 2019 Honda Civic with a busted AC had not made the list. The folder under her arm held the judge's preliminary findings. The house? The one she'd scrubbed and maintained and paid half the mortgage on for 4 years? Would be liquidated and split. Her half would come after attorney's fees, which meant she'd walk away with somewhere between $11,000 and $14,000, enough to rent something small for a few months while she figured out the rest. The finalized decree would come in 30 days. 30 days to become someone else's problem, then become her own. She started down the steps, calculating. Bus stop was 6 blocks east. Route 14 would get her to the diner by 1:15, which gave her exactly enough time to change into her uniform in the back bathroom before the lunch rush buried her. She needed the tips. She needed every single dollar the afternoon crowd would leave on those laminated tables. That was when she heard it. The sound came from somewhere above and behind her, a low mechanical thrumming that built fast, shaking the humid air before it ever appeared in the sky. People on the sidewalk below started looking up. Someone shouted something. A woman grabbed her child by the arm and pulled him back from the curb. The helicopter came in low over the courthouse building, banking hard toward the wide section of the parking lot where a temporary landing pad, orange cones, a man in a yellow vest, a fire extinguisher on standby, had apparently been set up sometime that morning. Mara hadn't noticed it when she arrived. She'd been too focused on not throwing up from nerves. It landed hard and fast, the rotor wash hitting like a wall. Her folder exploded open. Every single page, judge's preliminary findings, financial disclosures, property assessments, the highlighted paragraph she'd spent 3 nights memorizing, went airborne in every direction. She grabbed for them wildly, catching 2, watching the rest scatter across the parking lot like the world's most depressing ticker tape parade. "You have got to be kidding me," she said, to no one. She was already moving, chasing a page that was skidding under a parked SUV, when she heard a sharp crack near the helicopter's passenger door, the door swinging wide. And then the shouting started. "Franklin! Franklin, sit down!" "I'm fine. I just need a moment." "Sir, please don't." Mara had straightened up with her retrieved page in hand when she saw the old man go down. He was maybe 75, dressed in a suit that had cost more than her monthly rent, and he'd been trying to climb out of the helicopter when his legs simply gave way beneath him. He hit the asphalt on his side. Not a dramatic collapse, more of a slow crumple, like a building losing its structural argument with gravity. The 2 men in dark suits who'd been standing nearby froze for half a second, which was apparently all it took for everyone else in the immediate area to also freeze. Mara did not freeze. She was moving before she'd made any conscious decision to move, her remaining documents pressed against her chest, her heels clicking fast across the asphalt. She dropped to her knees beside the old man without thinking about what she was ruining or what her hands were touching. Sir, can you hear me?" His eyes were open. His face was the color of old wax. "Hot," he managed. "Just the heat." She pressed 2 fingers to the side of his neck. His pulse was there, but it felt wrong, too fast and thin, like a rubber band stretched too far. His skin was dry. That was the thing that got her attention. 93 degrees in that parking lot, and this man was completely dry. "He's not sweating," she said to the nearest dark suit. "That's heat exhaustion going to heat stroke. Does anyone have water? Cold water, not room temperature. Cold." "We have," the man started. "Get it, now. And call an ambulance. Don't just think about calling one." The man moved. The other one got his phone out. Mara was already loosening the old man's collar, talking to him in a low, steady voice. "What's your name?" "Franklin," he said. "Franklin Holt." "Okay, Franklin. I'm Mara. You're going to be fine, but I need you to stay still and stay talking to me. You been in that helicopter long?" 2 hours. He tried to sit up. She put a firm hand on his shoulder. "No, stay down. My godson is going to think, your godson can wait." From somewhere behind her came a voice. Low, controlled, but with something underneath it that wasn't controlled at all. "Franklin?" Mara didn't look up. She was accepting a bottle of cold water from the suit who'd returned, cracking it open, using her jacket sleeve, the good one, the one she'd worn to court, to wet it and press it to the back of Franklin's neck. "He's okay," she said to the voice behind her. "Or he will be. Someone called an ambulance?" "Just called," said the second suit. The voice behind her said quieter now. "What happened to him?" "Heat exhaustion, probably dehydration on top of it from the flight." She tilted the water bottle carefully, got Franklin to take a few sips. "You should have had him drink before you landed. Hot tarmac like this, age like his, that's a bad combination." A pause. "You a doctor?" "I'm a waitress." She glanced back over her shoulder for the first time. The man standing behind her was tall, not in the way that some tall men are tall, all awkward altitude and no mass, but the kind of tall that fills a space and makes you recalibrate it. He was maybe 32, 33, dressed in a dark blue shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, dark slacks, no jacket despite the heat. His face was sharp-featured, the kind of face that photographers liked, but there were shadows under his eyes that no amount of money had managed to fix. He was staring at her with an expression she couldn't immediately categorize. Not quite shock, not quite calculation, something in between. "You're a waitress," he repeated. "And you're blocking the light." She turned back to Franklin. The old man wheezed what might have been a laugh. "I like her," he said faintly. "Don't talk," Mara said. "Save it." "Declan," Franklin said anyway, ignoring her. "Stop!" Standing there. The tall man crouched down on Franklin's other side. Up close, Mara could see that his hands weren't quite steady. He reached out and gripped the old man's hand, and whatever was underneath his controlled voice came fully to the surface for exactly 2 seconds, something raw and old and terrified, before he pushed it back down. "I'm here," Declan said. "Gave your people a scare," Franklin murmured. "Don't do it again." The ambulance arrived 9 minutes later. Mara had Franklin's temperature down, his color slightly better, his breathing more even. She'd moved him out of the direct sun using someone's jacket, kept him talking, kept him awake. When the paramedics took over and she finally stood up, her knees were gray from the asphalt and her good jacket was soaked. She looked at the state of her documents. Several were still scattered. 2 had blown under vehicles. 1 appeared to have been run over. She started walking to collect them. "Wait." She turned. Declan Ashford was standing a few feet away, and he was looking at her like she was something he didn't quite have a category for. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "No," she agreed. She retrieved a page from under a Ford Explorer's back tire. "I didn't." "He's my godfather. He's been family since I was 4 years old." A pause. "I owe you." "You don't." She straightened up, assessed the remaining scattered pages. "He's going to need to get checked out properly, not just the ER and back home. Heat events at his age can have delayed effects. Make sure they run a full cardiac panel." Declan stared at her. "How do you know that?" My mother had a similar episode 3 summers ago. She said it flat, no invitation to dig further. They missed something the first time, caught it on the second. She looked at the folder in her hands, what was left of it. I have to go. I have a bus to catch. Miss Bennett, she said, without turning back. Mara Bennett. She walked away. She didn't look back because looking back was a habit she was trying to break. The folder was wrecked but salvageable. Her knees would need to be cleaned up in the diner bathroom. She had 3 hours until her shift started and 6 blocks to the bus stop and $43 in her checking account. And she had just spent 20 minutes saving a stranger's life while her own legal documents were getting run over in a parking lot. The day did not care. The heat did not relent. The bus was 4 minutes late. She sat on the bench at the stop and finally let herself feel it. The morning, the hearing, the judge's voice reading the findings without any particular feeling about what they meant. Marcus sitting at his table in his new shirt looking satisfied. The way her attorney had touched her arm afterward and said, "It's not as bad as it feels right now," which was the kind of thing people said when they couldn't think of anything true. Her phone buzzed. A text from her friend Danny. "How'd it go?" She stared at it. Typed, "I'll tell you later." Deleted it. Typed, "Not great." Deleted that too. Sent. Later. The bus came. She got on it. 3 days after the courthouse, Mara was working a double shift at Rosie's Diner on Clement Street, lunch rush sliding directly into the dead afternoon hours, which then bled into the dinner crush that the neighborhood counted on the way. It counted on rent being due and weather being unpredictable. She knew every regular by their usual order. She knew which tables tipped and which ones would leave her with 3/4 and a prayer. She knew the sound the coffee machine made when it was about to jam, and the specific way the floor near the kitchen door got slick after a rain. She knew this place the way you know something that has kept you afloat when everything else was sinking. She'd been staying at Danny's place since Marcus had effectively reclaimed the house by changing the locks 2 days before the hearing. Technically illegal, her attorney had said. Practically the kind of thing that takes months to undo through the court system. And did she really want to fight that battle right now on top of everything else? No, she did not. She'd packed 2 bags, asked Danny to take her in temporarily, and was now sleeping on a pull-out couch that had a spring poking through the mattress in a location she'd mapped precisely by the second night. The custody situation was the part she didn't let herself think about at work. She thought about it in the hours between 2 and 4 a.m., lying on that pullout, listening to Danny's apartment building settle into itself. Her daughter, Lily, was 6 years old and currently living primarily with Marcus under a temporary arrangement the court had blessed until the final decree came through. 2 weekends a month and 1 Wednesday dinner had been what the preliminary agreement gave her pending the final determination. 2 weekends. She refilled a coffee mug on autopilot, smiled at the man who said thank you without looking up from his laptop and moved to the next table. Marcus had filed for primary custody. His argument was financial stability. Her attorney had called it a pressure tactic, a negotiating move. Her attorney also charged $400 an hour and had reminded her twice that the retainer was running low. The bell above the diner door rang at 3:17 p.m. during the dead stretch between rushes. Mara was restocking the sugar dispensers at the counter and didn't look up immediately. "Sit anywhere you like," she called. "I'll be right with you." "I'm not here for coffee." She looked up. Declan Ashford stood just inside the door, wearing a gray t-shirt and dark jeans, looking considerably less like a billionaire than he had in the parking lot and only slightly less out of place. He had a slight sunburn across his nose that made him look younger than she'd thought he was. He was holding his car keys in one hand with the uncertain energy of someone who'd rehearsed this conversation and was now doubting all of it. "How did you find me?" she said. "You told me your name." A pause. "I have resources." "That's either impressive or alarming. I haven't decided." He almost smiled. "Franklin is home. Full cardiac workup, like you said. They did catch something. Minor, manageable, but something. The cardiologist said catching it now instead of 6 months from now made a significant difference." He stopped. "I wanted to tell you that in person." Mara set down the sugar dispenser. She looked at him for a moment. This man who'd flown into her worst day in a helicopter and then tracked her to a diner on Clement Street to deliver good news about his elderly godfather, and she felt something loosen slightly in her chest. Not relief exactly, more like the small release of tension you don't know you're carrying until it shifts. I'm glad, she said, and meant it. I also wanted to offer you something. He reached into his back pocket and produced a card. Not a business card, a plain white index card with a handwritten phone number on it. He set it on the counter. Not charity, I want to be clear about that. A consulting position, temporary, specific scope, 3 to 4 weeks. She didn't touch the card. What kind of consulting? The kind that involves sitting across a kitchen table from an 83-year-old woman named Vivian Cruz and talking to her like a human being, which apparently none of my people have been able to do in 18 months of trying. He said it without embarrassment, which she found, against her better instincts, slightly endearing. I'm trying to acquire a property on Halstead. She owns the last building I need. My team has made 6 offers. She's rejected all of them. My advisors say she's being irrational. I think she's being stubborn for a reason nobody's bothered to understand yet. And you think I can understand it? I think you have a quality that I've watched operate under pressure, and it's rarer than most people realize. He said it plainly, not as a compliment designed to work, just as an observation. I think she'll talk to you. Mara looked at the card. She did the math she'd been doing constantly for 3 weeks. The retainer, the bus fare, the spring in the pull-out mattress, Lily's face on the one Wednesday dinner she'd had with her, the way her daughter had hugged her too hard and too long at the end of the evening. What does the position pay? She asked. He told her. She kept her face entirely neutral, which took more effort than she showed. The number was enough to cover the legal fees, the apartment deposit, 3 months of rent on something small but hers. It was the kind of number that didn't change your life if your life was already a certain size. For Mara, at this particular moment, it was a rope thrown into a well. You'd want me to convince her to sell, she said. I'd want you to have an honest conversation with her and tell me what you learn. A careful pause. Those aren't necessarily the same thing. She studied him. You know that's an unusual distinction for a billionaire to make. I've been told I'm an unusual billionaire. By people who work for you, probably. Something shifted in his expression. Fair point. She picked up the card, turned it over, blank on the back. I'll think about it, she said. That's all I'm asking. He turned to go, stopped with his hand on the door. For what it's worth, he said, without turning back, the way you handled that parking lot, you didn't think about yourself once, not for a second. He seemed to be working out how to say the next part. I've met a lot of people who are very good at appearing that way. You didn't appear anything, you just did it. The bell above the door rang on his way out. Mara stood at the counter with a handwritten phone number on an index card and a dinner rush coming in 45 minutes and a pull-out couch with a broken spring waiting for her at the end of the night. She put the card in her apron pocket. She didn't make any decisions yet. She just put it somewhere she'd know where it was. The coffee machine made its pre-jam sound. She went to fix it before it got worse, which was, she had learned, the only practical approach to most problems worth solving. The letter from Marcus's attorney arrived 2 days later. It changed everything. The letter was printed on cream-colored paper with a law firm letterhead so aggressively formal, it looked designed to intimidate before you'd read a single word. Mara stood in Danny's kitchen at 6:43 in the morning, still in the oversized shirt she'd slept in, and read it twice because the first time her brain refused to absorb it. Marcus was filing for full primary custody of Lily. Not the shared arrangement the preliminary decree had outlined. Not a modification. Full primary. With Mara reduced to supervised visitation pending a financial stability review. His attorneys had filed the motion 3 days ago. The hearing date was in 6 weeks. Supervised visitation. As if she were a danger. As if 6 years of being the parent who showed up for the fevers and the nightmares and the school pickups and the 3 a.m. requests for water that were really just requests for reassurance, counted for nothing the moment a judge compared her bank account to Marcus's. She set the letter on the kitchen counter. She put both hands flat on the laminate surface and stood there until her breathing evened out. Danny appeared in the kitchen doorway in her bathrobe, reading Mara's face the way a person reads weather. How bad? Full custody. Mara's voice came out steady, which surprised her. Supervised visits. Danny said a word that was not suitable for early morning polite company. Then, what do you need? Coffee, Mara said, and about $20,000 I don't have. She called her attorney at 8 a.m. Patricia Nguyen answered on the third ring, which meant she was already in the office, which meant the day was already going sideways for someone somewhere. Mara explained. Patricia listened without interrupting, which was one of the things Mara had paid $400 an hour to appreciate. The financial stability argument is real, Patricia said when Mara finished. It's not insurmountable, but it's real. A judge is going to look at your current housing situation, your income, your liquid assets, which are minimal. Which are minimal, Patricia confirmed. We can fight this, Mara, but to fight it effectively, I need to file responses, depose his witnesses, potentially bring in a financial evaluator who can contextualize your situation. That's not cheap. We're talking another $8,000 to $12,000 before we get to the hearing itself. Mara stared at the ceiling of Danny's kitchen. There was a water stain up there shaped vaguely like the state of Ohio. She'd spent a lot of early mornings looking at it. What's the timeline for me to pull together that kind of money? A pause. 4 weeks, realistically, to give us time to properly prepare. 4 weeks. She reached into the pocket of the shirt she'd worn yesterday, draped over the kitchen chair. The index card was still there. She'd been carrying it for 2 days like it was something she might eventually need and wasn't ready to use. She looked at the handwritten number. Patricia, she said, what if my income situation changed in the next week? What if I had stable housing? Then the picture changes considerably. Stability is the argument he's making against you. Stability is also the argument that defeats him, if you can demonstrate it genuinely and not just on paper. Got it. She hung up and looked at the card for another 30 seconds. Then she dialed. Declan picked up on the second ring. No greeting, just, Bennett. Ashford, she said, I'm calling about the position. I have conditions. A beat. Tell me. I want the scope of what you're asking me to do in writing, not a contract designed by your legal team to protect you. A plain document in plain language that tells me exactly what I'm being hired to find out and what I'm not being asked to do. I want a 2-week advance on the payment so I can secure housing before I start. And I want it clearly understood that if what I learned from this woman tells me the deal is wrong, I'll tell you that, and you'll listen. Silence. Not the uncomfortable kind. The kind that meant he was actually thinking. The advance I can do today. The plain language document I can have to you by tomorrow morning. The third condition. Another pause. I already told you those aren't the same thing. Convincing her and understanding her. You said it. I want it in writing too. All right. She hadn't expected that. She'd expected negotiation. She took a breath. Okay then. There's a building on Halstead I'd like you to see before you meet her. Are you free Thursday morning? I work the breakfast shift. I'm free by 11. I'll have someone pick you up. I'll meet you there, she said. Text me the address. She wasn't ready to have his drivers know where she was sleeping. That felt like giving up something she wasn't sure she'd get back. He texted the address 4 minutes later. No comment. Just the address and 11:30. She looked at it and felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Not hope exactly. Hope felt too fragile right now. Too easily broken. Something more structural than hope. Like the first piece of scaffolding going up on a building that had been knocked down. It wasn't the building yet, but it was the beginning of being able to build one. She put the card back in her pocket and went to pour herself that coffee. The building on Halstead Street was a 3-story structure that had once been beautiful and was now mostly just old. It sat at the corner of Halstead and Decker, brick-faced, with tall windows that had been fitted with security bars at some point and never had them removed, and a ground floor space that had a hand-painted sign above the door reading Cruises in faded green letters with a small open torch painted beside it. The restaurant occupied the ground floor. The upper 2 floors had been residential at some point. Still were, Mara assumed, or had been recently. She arrived 4 minutes early and stood on the opposite sidewalk looking at it. The neighborhood around it was in the specific state of transition that she recognized from other parts of the city. A construction crane 3 blocks north, 2 buildings on this block already empty and papered over, a third with a realtor's notice in the window. Cruises sat in the middle of it like a tooth that hadn't fallen out yet, the one stubborn thing remaining while everything around it reconsidered its future. She heard the car before she saw it. A dark sedan, nothing flashy, which surprised her. She'd expected something with a driver and tinted windows. Instead, Declan Ashford parked it himself at the curb and got out in jeans and a white shirt, squinting slightly in the noon sun. He had a coffee in each hand, which she also hadn't expected. He held one out as he approached. "I guessed? Black. 1 sugar." "Wrong," she said, taking it anyway. "Black. No sugar. But I'll drink it." "Noted for next time." He turned to look at the building. "What do you see?" She looked at it properly, the way she'd been doing since she arrived. A place that meant something. Still does, to whoever's in it. She paused. "What do you see?" Structural soundness, prime corner position, proximity to the transit corridor. He said it without apology, but also without pride. Just facts. "I know how that sounds." "It sounds like someone who's very good at one way of looking at things." He glanced at her sidelong. "Which is why I'm standing on a sidewalk with a waitress instead of sending my acquisition team for the 7th time." "Consultant," she said. A pause. "Right. Consultant." They stood there for a moment drinking their coffees, and the silence was less awkward than she expected, which she filed away without thinking about it too hard. "Tell me about the redevelopment," she said. "What goes there, if she sells?" "Mixed-use tower, 42 stories, ground floor retail, residential above, commercial floors in the middle. The Halsted Corridor project has been 5 years in planning. This building is the final acquisition to secure the full block. Everything else is either already purchased or under agreement." He paused. "It generates 17,000 construction jobs over 3 years, permanent residential units for roughly 2,000 people, 3 acres of public green space on the rooftop and surrounding plaza. And the restaurant. The current plan includes a plaque recognizing the history of the site and the Cruz family's contribution to the neighborhood." She turned to look at him. "A plaque?" He met her look. His jaw tightened slightly, which he thought might be the physical expression of knowing, somewhere, that a thing sounds worse than you hoped it would. "That's what the current plan includes, yes." "Okay," she said. She turned back to the building. "Tell me about Vivian Cruz. Everything you know." He knew a reasonable amount, which meant his team had done their homework. Vivian Cruz, 83 years old. Born in this neighborhood, raised 3 blocks from where they were standing. Had opened the restaurant with her husband Ernesto in 1984, the year their eldest daughter was born. Ernesto had died 11 years ago. Vivian had continued running the place with help from a rotating cast of family members and longtime employees, serving the same menu of home-cooked meals. Heavy on the rice and beans, heavy on the soup, heavy on the kind of food that takes most of the day to make properly, that had made it a neighborhood institution. 6 offers, all rejected. No counteroffers, no engagement with the terms. Just no. "Has anyone sat with her?" Mara asked. "Not to negotiate, just to sit." He looked slightly uncomfortable. "My team is..." "They're transaction-focused." She finished her coffee, set the cup on top of a nearby trash can. "I want to go in." "Today?" "Not to negotiate. Not to mention you or the project at all. I just want to go in for lunch." She looked at him. "Is that okay with you, or do you need it on a timeline?" Something in his face shifted, like he was recalibrating something. "It's fine." "Good." She paused. "You should stay out here." He blinked. "What?" "She's rejected 6 offers from your people. If I walk in with a man in a white shirt who looks like he owns 4 zip codes, I'm already compromised." She said it without cruelty, just practically. "Give me an hour. I'll call you." He looked at her for a moment with that same expression from the parking lot, the one she still didn't have a full category for. Then he reached into his pocket and produced his phone, tapped something, held it up, her number on the screen. "Already have it from this morning." "Then you don't need to give it to me again." She turned and crossed the street. She heard him say behind her, "You're going to be difficult to work with, aren't you?" It wasn't quite a question. She didn't answer it. Cruz's smelled like garlic and something slow-cooked, and a particular kind of warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature. The interior was dim after the noon brightness outside, and Mara stood in the doorway for a moment, letting her eyes adjust. 8 tables, mismatched chairs, walls covered in framed photographs, and a hand-lettered menu board that hadn't changed layout in what looked like decades. A jukebox in the corner that was almost certainly functional. A long counter with 4 stools, behind which a pass-through window opened to the kitchen. 2 tables were occupied. An elderly couple sharing a plate of rice and chicken. A young man eating alone with a textbook open beside his food. A woman emerged from the kitchen through the swinging door beside the counter. She was small, maybe 5 feet on a good day, with white hair pinned back and an apron that had seen several thousand more meals than most people ever cooked. She moved with the particular efficiency of someone who had spent 40 years navigating a small kitchen and had no interest in wasted motion. "Sit wherever you like," she said, in a voice that carried comfortably across the room. "I'll be right with you." "Thank you," Mara said, and chose a stool at the counter. It was the right choice. She knew that the moment she sat down, the counter was where the conversation happened, in places like this. The tables were for eating. The counter was for everything else. The woman, Vivian, though Mara had no intention of using that name unprompted, brought her a glass of water and a handwritten menu that was 4 items long. Chicken stew, black bean soup, rice and oxtail. A special that changed daily, today being something with fish that Vivian described in enough detail that it was clearly the thing she was proudest of today. "The soup," Mara said, "and whatever you think goes with it." Vivian looked at her for a moment, with the look of someone who had been reading people across a counter for 40 years and had strong opinions about what they saw. "You haven't eaten properly today." It was not a question. "Yesterday wasn't great either," Mara admitted. Vivian went through the pass-through. Mara heard pots, a ladle, a quiet conversation in Spanish with someone unseen in the kitchen. The young man with the textbook turned a page. The elderly couple laughed softly at something. The soup arrived in a bowl that held about twice what Mara expected. A small plate of rice beside it, unsolicited. A piece of bread that had clearly been baked that morning. She ate. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first spoonful, and then the hunger arrived all at once. The kind that comes from days of not quite eating enough and not quite admitting it. She ate the way a person eats when they stop performing not being hungry and just let themselves be hungry, and it took her most of the bowl to realize that Vivian had come back to the counter and was watching her with an expression that Mara recognized from exactly one other person, her own mother, before things had gotten difficult between them. "You're not from around here," Vivian said. It was conversational, not an accusation. "I'm from the Clement Street area. Rosie's Diner, I work there." "Rosie's," a small nod of recognition. "I know that place. Good pie." "Good pie," Mara agreed. "The rest varies." Vivian almost smiled. She refilled Mara's water without being asked. "You look like someone who's had a hard week." "Hard month," Mara said. "It's fine. I'm working through it." Vivian leaned both hands on the counter, and there was something in the posture, the ease of it, the authority of it, the complete ownership of the space, that Mara found herself studying without wanting to look like she was studying it. This was a woman who had never doubted that this counter belonged to her. "What kind of hard?" Mara looked at her soup. In another situation, with another person, she'd deflect. But something about the directness of the question, the complete absence of performance in it, made deflection feel wrong. "Divorce," she said. "Custody fight. Trying to figure out where I'm sleeping 2 months from now." She paused. "The usual catastrophe." "The usual catastrophe," Vivian repeated, and now she did smile, though it was the kind of smile that had some sadness threaded through it. "I had one of those, 1987. Ernesto and I almost lost this place to the bank. We were 3 weeks from closing." She said it with the distance of time, but also with the precision of someone who still knew the exact number of days. 3 weeks. What happened? "We stayed open." Vivian's chin lifted slightly. "Every day. No matter what the bank said, no matter what the lawyers said. We stayed open. Because the people who came here needed us to stay open. And we needed them to come. It works like that." She picked up a cloth and wiped down the counter in a slow, circular motion that was less about cleaning and more about thinking. When you close, even temporarily, people find somewhere else to go, and then they don't come back. Not because they don't want to, just because that's how people work. They fill the space with whatever's available. She looked up. So we didn't close. And the bank? A food writer came in one day. She wrote something. People came because of what she wrote. Revenue went up enough that we made the payment with 4 days to spare. Vivian put the cloth down. I don't believe in things working out. I believe in not stopping. Mara looked at her. That's a distinction. It is. Vivian looked back at her with calm, direct eyes. You look like someone who understands it. They sat in a comfortable silence for a moment, the restaurant doing its quiet afternoon thing around them. Then Mara finished her bread and reached for her wallet, and Vivian held up one hand. No. I can't. You can come back, Vivian said firmly. That's the price. You come back. Mara looked at her, felt something shift somewhere in her chest again. The same structural feeling from the morning she'd called Declan, but warmer and older and more complicated. I will, she said, and meant it. She was halfway to the door when the thought arrived. Quiet, cold, arriving the way bad realizations tend to arrive. Not with drama, but with the calm certainty of something that's been true for a while and has finally been noticed. She knew this woman, not by face or name, but she knew what this restaurant was. She'd been trying to place the feeling since she'd walked in. The soup, the bread, the particular way the light came through the front window, the sound of the jukebox, even when it wasn't playing. It had been tugging at something for the past 40 minutes, and she hadn't let herself follow it. Now she followed it, 7 years ago. She'd been 23 and 3 months out of a job she'd lost, and 2 weeks behind on rent and eating whatever was cheapest, which had progressively become less and less. Until a Thursday afternoon when she'd sat on a curb on Halsted Street with $8 in her pocket and the very clear understanding that she did not know what she was going to do next. A small woman with white hair, not yet entirely white, more gray-streaked then, had come out of the restaurant behind her and stood on the sidewalk and said simply, plainly, without condescension, "Come inside, eat something." She hadn't known the woman's name. She'd been too overwhelmed to ask and too grateful to care. She'd eaten a bowl of soup that tasted exactly like the one she'd just finished, and she'd sat at this counter for 2 hours until she felt like a person again. And when she'd finally gotten up to leave, the woman had pressed a folded $20 bill into her hand and said, "Come back when things are better." And Mara had walked out onto Halsted Street feeling, for reasons she still couldn't fully articulate, like she could survive what was happening to her. She had never gone back. Not because she forgot, but because going back when things were better had felt somehow like tempting the better things to stop. She stood in the doorway of Cruises with one hand on the doorframe and understood, with a completeness that was almost physical, that the assignment Declan Ashford had sent her on had just become something entirely different. She did not go back to Vivian. She wasn't ready for that conversation yet. She stepped out onto Halsted Street and stood in the afternoon sun, and Declan Ashford was exactly where she hadn't expected him to be. Sitting on the curb on the opposite side of the street, jacket off, elbows on his knees, looking at his phone with the posture of a man who'd been told to wait and was actually waiting. She crossed the street. He looked up. "Well?" he said. She stood in front of him for a moment, and what she felt must have been visible on her face because his expression shifted, something alerting in it, the way a person's face changes when they realize the conversation is about to be harder than they expected. "I need you to tell me," she said, "exactly what the plan is for that building. Not the press release version, the actual plan. What happens to it?" He stood up. He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that meant he was deciding how honest to be, and settling on completely honest, which she hadn't been entirely sure he would. "The building comes down," he said. "Groundbreak is scheduled for 14 months out. The restaurant space, the residential above it, it's all part of the footprint. And the plaque." "And the plaque," he said. He watched her face. "What did you find out?" She looked at the restaurant across the street, at the faded green lettering, at the window where the afternoon light was doing exactly what it had done for 40 years. "I found out," she said slowly, "that this is more complicated than either of us realized." She turned back to him. "And I found out that I have a conflict of interest I need to tell you about." He waited. He was good at waiting, she was noticing. Most men with his kind of money weren't.
They filled silence with words because silence felt to them like money not being made.
That restaurant, she said, that woman, 7 years ago? She stopped, started again. She fed me when I had nothing. I didn't know it was her until 20 minutes ago. I didn't know it was this place. Declan said nothing, just looked at her. I'm telling you now because you need to know who you hired, she said, and because I'm not going to pretend I can be neutral about this anymore. I can still do what you asked, but you need to know what you're actually asking me to do. He was quiet for a long moment. A car passed. Someone's radio bleating out an old song neither of them could quite place. Okay, he said finally. Okay, she said. That's it? What would you like me to say? I don't know. Something about this complicating things. Something about how this changes the terms. It does complicate things, he said. It doesn't change the terms. I hired you to find out what I was missing. You just told me something I was missing. He picked his jacket off the curb, shook the dust off it. Keep going. She looked at him for a long moment. He didn't look away. All right, she said. They stood on the Halstead Street sidewalk in the afternoon heat, two people with no obvious reason to trust each other, circling the edges of something neither of them had names for yet. The restaurant across the street sat steady in the sun, patient and permanent seeming and made of old brick that had survived everything the last 40 years had thrown at it. It didn't know what was coming, or maybe it did. Maybe buildings know these things the way old people know weather, in their bones and their joints, before the clouds ever arrive. The advance hit Mara's account the following morning. Not a wire transfer that would take 3 business days, not a check she'd have to hold for clearance, but an immediate deposit that appeared at 7:14 a.m. while she was standing in Danny's kitchen waiting for the coffee to finish. She stared at the number on her phone screen for longer than was probably dignified. Then she put the phone face down on the counter and poured her coffee and stood there in the quiet of the early morning because she needed a moment before she let herself feel anything about it. The document had arrived the previous evening, as promised. It was 2 pages. Plain language. No definition section that ran 6 pages before the actual terms appeared. She'd read it twice, found nothing she'd argue with, signed it, and photographed it to send to Patricia Nguyen with a brief note explaining the situation. Patricia had responded at 11 p.m. with, "This changes things significantly. Call me tomorrow." She called at 8:30 from the sidewalk outside Danny's building because some conversations needed open air. The income alone helps, Patricia said, but what really helps is the housing. If you can show the court a signed lease on a stable residence before the hearing, that's the single most effective counter to the financial instability argument. Marcus's entire case rests on painting you as transient. Give the judge a lease and an employer and the picture changes completely. I can have both within the week, Mara said. Then do that. And Mara? Patricia paused in the way she paused when she was about to say something she thought might be hard to hear. Be careful about this arrangement. A temporary consulting position with a real estate developer while you're involved in a negotiation he has financial interest in. It's not illegal, it's not even unusual, but if Marcus's attorneys find out and frame it badly, we need to be able to explain it clearly. It's clearly explained in the document. I know. I just want you to know it can become a thing if someone decides to make it one. Mara thought about that for the rest of her walk back inside. She thought about it during her shift that day, the morning rush at Rosie's, the particular repetitive motion of the work that always left part of her brain free to run separate calculations. She thought about Marcus's attorneys and what they were capable of making into a thing, and she thought about the fact that the law firm representing Marcus in the custody case was called Greer, Lund and Associates. She didn't think about the name again until 2 days later when Declan's plain language document arrived in a follow-up email with a copy of the full development agreement for her reference. She wasn't supposed to need it. It was background, he'd said, in case she wanted context. But she read it anyway, the way she read anything she was handed, which was completely. The legal counsel listed for the acquisition side of the Halstead Corridor project, responsible for managing property holdout negotiations. Greer, Lund and Associates. She read the name twice, looked away, looked back. Greer, Lund and Associates was handling the legal pressure on Vivian Cruz's property. The same firm was simultaneously managing Marcus's custody petition against Mara. She sat with that for the better part of an hour, turning it over, looking for the explanation that made it coincidence rather than something else. It was a large firm. They handled real estate and family law separately. There was no obvious mechanism by which the two cases connected. But the feeling she had sitting with it was the feeling she'd learned over 30 years of life, making her its recurring lesson to take seriously. Not paranoia, just pattern recognition. She didn't tell Declan yet. She filed it somewhere she'd be able to find it and kept moving. The apartment she found was a one-bedroom on Sutter Street, third floor of a building that had a working elevator and a landlord who answered his phone, which put it considerably above the last several places she'd looked at. The walls were off-white in the way of walls that had been repainted over several tenants and would need doing again in a year, and the kitchen was narrow, and the bedroom window faced a brick wall rather than anything scenic. It was the kind of apartment that asked nothing of you aesthetically and delivered functional shelter in return, which was precisely what she needed. She signed the lease on a Wednesday. That evening, she went to her Wednesday dinner with Lily. Marcus's mother dropped Lily off at the restaurant Mara had chosen. Neutral ground, public space, and Lily came through the door the way 6-year-olds come through doors when they've been waiting to see you, which is at approximately full speed with no apparent concern for anything between them and the destination. She hit Mara at hip height and held on, and Mara picked her up even though Lily was getting too big for it, because some things you don't stop doing just because the logistics are getting harder. "You smell like the diner," Lily informed her. "I work today." "Can I have a grilled cheese?" "You can have whatever you want." Thus, they sat in a booth, and Lily had her grilled cheese and Mara had coffee, and they talked about the things Lily wanted to talk about, which were a book about dolphins she'd gotten from the school library, a disagreement with her friend Sophie that had been resolved but the details were still worth examining, and the fact that her father had gotten a new couch that was really big and kind of uncomfortable, actually. Mara listened to all of it with her full attention, which was the thing she was most deliberate about in these dinners. The full attention, nothing distracted, no part of her elsewhere. When Lily was working on her second half of the grilled cheese, she looked up at Mara with the particular directness that children have before they learn to soften things. "When do I get to sleep at your new place?" she asked. Mara's chest did something complicated. "Soon," she said. "I just signed the lease. I need to get some furniture first." "Do I get my own drawer?" "You get your own drawer." Lily considered this seriously. "Okay." She picked up the other half of her sandwich. "Sophie has her own whole room at her dad's apartment, but I think a drawer is good for starting." "It is," Mara said. "It's a very good start." She held it together through the dinner, through the drop-off, through the drive back to what was now her apartment with its off-white walls and narrow kitchen. She made it all the way through the door, and as far as sitting on the floor, she had no furniture yet, just a sleeping bag and a folding table, before she let herself feel the full weight of the evening. A drawer. Her daughter was negotiating for a drawer. She sat on the floor of her empty apartment and let herself be angry at Marcus, properly and completely, the way she hadn't allowed herself to be during the hearing or the letter or any of the careful, strategic conversations with Patricia. She let it move through her fully, and then she let it settle, because she couldn't afford to carry it as anger. She needed to carry it as fuel. She was back on her feet within 20 minutes. She made a list on her phone of the furniture she needed and what it would cost and in what order to acquire it. She set an alarm for 6 a.m. She charged her phone. Then she went back to Halstead Street. She hadn't told Vivian she was coming. She'd thought about it. Texting ahead felt presumptuous, and there was no mechanism to text ahead anyway. She simply showed up on a Thursday morning before the lunch rush with 2 cups of coffee from the place on the corner because arriving empty-handed felt wrong. Vivian was in the process of arranging chairs when Mara came through the door. She looked at Mara, then at the coffees, then back at Mara, with an expression that did not give away whether this was welcome or inconvenient. "You came back," she said. "I said I would. People say a lot of things." Vivian took one of the cups, looked at it. "You remembered how I take it?" "I didn't know how you take it. That one has cream and 2 sugars because it seemed like a reasonable guess." Vivian sipped it, made a small sound of neither approval nor complaint. "Sit down." They sat at the counter as they had before. The restaurant was still being set up around them. A young man Mara hadn't met was wiping down tables at the far end, and someone in the kitchen was making sounds that meant the day's cooking had already started. The smell was the same as before. It would probably smell the same every morning for as long as the place was open. "You're not just a customer," Vivian said. It wasn't a question. Mara had thought about how to handle this moment. She'd rehearsed several approaches and discarded all of them, because every version that involved easing into it felt like a lie wearing soft clothing. "No," she said. "I'm not." She put it plainly. Who Declan was, what the project was, what she'd been hired to do. She watched Vivian's face as she talked, and what she saw there wasn't the surprise or anger she'd been prepared for. It was something more like recognition, the expression of a person whose suspicion has just been confirmed.
"I know about the project," Vivian said when Mara finished. "They've sent people 6 times, lawyers, developers. One time a man who described himself as a community liaison and thought I wouldn't notice he was reading from talking points." She set her coffee cup down. "What I didn't know was that they'd changed the approach." "He's not sure his approach has been right," Mara said carefully. "I think he's actually trying to understand what he's been missing."
"And what have you told him he's been missing?"
"I told him I had a conflict of interest, that this place meant something to me personally." Mara paused. 7 years ago, I was sitting on the curb outside. You brought me in." Vivian went still. She studied Mara's face with the focused attention of someone running through a memory. A long moment passed. "I remember you," she said finally. "You had a blue jacket with a torn pocket." Mara blinked. Yes. I remember the jacket because I almost offered to sew it and then thought it might embarrass you." A small pause. "You ate 2 bowls. You didn't ask for the second one. I just brought it." "I remember." Mara's voice had gone slightly unsteady, which annoyed her. She'd planned to stay even. Vivian looked at her for a long moment. "And now, here you are." "Here I am," Mara said, "working for the man who wants to buy your building. And I thought about not telling you, and I couldn't do it. So I'm telling you." Vivian was quiet. She turned her coffee cup in small rotations on the counter, not fidgeting, more like thinking through her hands. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past. The young man at the far end of the restaurant pushed through the kitchen door. "What is he planning to do with it?" Vivian asked. "Honestly, not the version they put in the letters." The building comes down. 42-story tower sub. Residential and commercial. The neighborhood gets the plaza and green space. This place gets a plaque. Vivian nodded slowly, like she'd always known the sentence would end exactly there. "A plaque," she said. "Yes." "Ernesto built that kitchen with 4 other men over 3 weekends," Vivian said. "He was not a contractor. He made many mistakes and fixed them. The counter out there, he installed it wrong the first time and had to pull the whole thing out and start again. He cried about it. A grown man, 50 years old, crying about a counter." She touched the surface she was sitting at. "This is the second counter, the correct one." She looked at Mara. "A plaque tells you the name of something. It doesn't tell you what it cost." "No," Mara agreed. "It doesn't." Another silence, but not an empty one. "I'm not refusing to sell because I'm old and stubborn," Vivian said then, and there was an edge to it, not defensive, just precise. The edge of someone correcting a mischaracterization they've heard too many times. "I'm refusing because the day I sign those papers is the day I tell 50 years of people that none of it meant anything, that a building is just a building and a number is just a number, and the things that happened inside this place can be converted into cash and walked away from." She straightened on the stool. "I know what development is. I know what a city becoming more expensive means. I'm not an idiot, and I'm not naive. But I've watched 3 other restaurants on this block disappear in the last 4 years, and not one of them, not one, left anything you could point to and say that's what was here. A plaque is a consolation prize they give you so they don't have to feel bad at the ribbon cutting." Mara had been holding her coffee cup without drinking it for several minutes. She set it down. She understood, in the way that understanding sometimes arrives not as a thought but as a physical thing, that she had just been handed the argument Declan hadn't been able to find with 6 attempts by a team of professionals. And she also understood that it wasn't an argument she could deliver to him like a strategy. It was a truth she was going to have to make him sit inside until he felt it. "Can I ask you something?" Mara said. "You can ask. What would it take? Not money, I don't mean that. What would it actually take for you to feel like this place's legacy was real? That it wasn't just erased? Vivian looked at her steadily. That's a very different question than anyone has ever asked me. I know. A long pause. The kitchen sounds continued behind the door. The smell of the day's cooking moved through the room like something alive. Vivian turned her coffee cup one more rotation. If the food still got made, she said slowly, if the people who came here still had somewhere to come, if there was something real, not symbolic, not decorative, but actually real, that carried what this place was into whatever comes next. She stopped, started again. Ernesto used to say that a restaurant is not the walls. The walls are just where the restaurant lives. If the restaurant can live somewhere else, she shook her head. But that's not what they're offering. They're offering a plaque. I know, Mara said. But what you just said, can I take that back to him? Vivian looked at her for a long moment. The expression on her face was not quite trust, too much history for that to arrive this fast, but it was something adjacent to trust, the beginning of the possibility of it. You can take it to him, she said, but I want to meet him. Mara had not expected that. You want to meet Declan? If he's the one making the decision, I want to look at him when he hears it. Vivian's eyes were calm and clear and completely serious. I'm 83 years old. I don't have time for intermediaries. I'll ask him. You do that. Vivian slid off her stool. She moved toward the kitchen, then stopped and looked back. Come for dinner this week. Bring him if he agrees. I'll cook. You don't have to cook for us. I cook for everyone who sits at my tables. Vivian pushed through the kitchen door. It's not a concession. It's just what I do. The door swung shut behind her. Mara sat at the counter with her cooling coffee and the feeling that the ground under this whole situation had just shifted several degrees, and not necessarily in the direction anyone had been expecting. She picked up her phone and dialed Declan. He answered on the first ring this time. She wants to meet you, Mara said. Dinner, this week, here at the restaurant. She'll cook. She paused. I'd strongly recommend you say yes. Silence on his end. Then, what changed? I told her who I was, who you were, everything. Another pause. I know that wasn't the assignment. No, it wasn't. I know. She waited. Outside, Halstead Street was doing its mid-morning thing. Foot traffic, a woman with a stroller, a delivery bike threading between parked cars. Normal urban life, unaware it was background scenery for something that mattered. What did she say? Declan asked. When you told her. Mara looked at the counter. The second counter, the correct one, installed by a man who cried about the first one and started over. She said enough, Mara said. Come to dinner and hear the rest in person. Another pause. Longer this time. Wednesday, he said. I'll need to arrange someone for Noah. It was the first time he'd mentioned his son to her. She noticed it without commenting on it. Wednesday works, 7 o'clock. I'll be there. She hung up and sat for another moment. Through the kitchen door, she could hear Vivian moving through the space with the economy of someone who knew every inch of it, and behind that, the faint sound of something on the stove that smelled like the beginning of something long cooked and patient and worth waiting for. Then she called Patricia Nguyen. I need you to look into something, she said when Patricia picked up. The firm handling the property acquisition side of the Halstead Corridor project, Greer, Lund and Associates. A pause. That's the same firm handling Marcus's custody petition. I know. I want to know if that's coincidence. Patricia was quiet for a moment in the way she was quiet when something had caught her full attention. How did you come across this? The acquisition agreement listed them as legal counsel. Mara watched a pigeon land on the sidewalk outside the window and immediately regret it when a kid on a bike came through. Marcus works in commercial real estate. He knows people in that world. It might be nothing. It might be nothing, Patricia agreed in a tone that meant she was already thinking about how it might be something. I'll look into it, carefully. Carefully, Mara confirmed. I don't want to move on it until we know what it is. She put the phone in her pocket. She thought about the letter on cream-colored paper and the 6 rejected offers and the law firm with its fingers in 2 separate corners of her life. She thought about the fact that Marcus had spent 4 years watching her manage things, the apartment, the bills, Lily's schedule, everything, and had somehow managed to believe he was the capable one in the marriage. She thought about the plaque they wanted to put on the empty space where Vivian's restaurant stood. Consolation prizes, Vivian had called them, so they don't have to feel bad at the ribbon cutting. She stood up from the counter, left a 10 on the surface for the coffee, even though she knew it would probably be sitting there when she came back. Outside, the morning was already heavy with heat. The construction crane 3 blocks north made its slow arc over the roofline. Mara stood on the Halstead Street sidewalk and looked at the restaurant's facade. The green lettering, the torch, the security bar windows that had never been removed, and tried to picture it gone. She couldn't quite do it. Not because it was unimaginable, but because every time she tried to build the image of empty space where it stood, her mind kept filling it back in. Some things resist being unmade. Even in your imagination. She turned and started toward the bus stop. She had a shift to get to and an apartment to furnish, and a Wednesday dinner with a man who had so far shown her that he was capable of listening, which was rarer than it should have been and worth more than he probably knew. She had no certainty about how any of this would land. She had no guarantee that Declan would hear what Vivian said and feel what needed to be felt, rather than what was convenient. She had no clean path through the next 6 weeks to a custody hearing she had to win for her daughter's sake. But she had a signed lease. She had Patricia Nguyen looking at the right things. She had Vivian Cruz cooking dinner on Wednesday, which meant that whatever conversation happened that evening would happen inside the very place the conversation was about. And she had somewhere underneath all of it the particular stubbornness of someone who had once sat on a curb on Halstead Street with $8 and nowhere to go and had found a way to keep moving. That was not nothing. That had never been nothing. Wednesday arrived the way consequential days sometimes do, quietly, without ceremony. The weather neither dramatic nor particularly kind. Overcast, mid-70s, the kind of evening where the city just goes about its business and doesn't bother announcing that something important is happening inside it. Mara got to Cruz's at 6:45. She wanted to be there before Declan, partly to help Vivian if she needed it, and partly because she didn't want to walk in at the same time as him, the two of them arriving together like a unified front, which they were not. They were two people with separate stakes in whatever happened tonight, and Vivian deserved to see that clearly. The restaurant was closed to the public for the evening. Vivian had done this without being asked, had simply put a handwritten sign in the window that said, "Private event, Wednesday," and left it at that. 3 tables had been pushed together at the center of the room and covered with a cloth that was clearly the good one, brought out from somewhere in the back. There were candles, not for atmosphere, but because there had always been candles, Vivian said, since Ernesto put them on the tables the first week they opened and never stopped. "You didn't have to close for this," Mara said. "I wanted quiet," Vivian said, from the kitchen doorway. She was in a blue dress instead of her usual apron over everything, which made her look both more formal and somehow older. "When I have an important conversation, I don't need 4 other conversations happening around it." "Fair. Come taste this." She disappeared back into the kitchen. What followed was 20 minutes of Mara standing in Vivian's kitchen, being handed small portions of various things and asked for her honest opinion, which was the kind of task that was both entirely pleasant and completely beside the point of the evening, but which Vivian clearly required, so Mara offered her honest opinions on the seasoning of the rice and the weight of the stew and the question of whether the bread needed another 5 minutes. And somewhere in that process, the knot in her shoulders loosened enough to function. Declan arrived at 7:02. He knocked, which she hadn't expected. The door was unlocked, and he knew it. But he knocked anyway, and when Mara opened it, he was standing on the sidewalk in a dark jacket over a plain shirt, no tie, and he'd clearly made the same calculus she had about not overdressing. He had a bottle of wine in one hand, which he looked at as she opened the door, as though suddenly unsure whether it was the right call. "I didn't know if she drank wine," he said. "I don't know either. Bring it in." He stepped inside and stood for a moment, doing what she'd noticed him do at the sidewalk the first day, taking in the space seriously, not just registering it. His eyes moved across the photographs on the walls, the hand-lettered menu board, the jukebox in the corner. He looked at the tables pushed together with the good cloth and the candles, and something in his posture shifted slightly, something that was difficult to name, but that had to do with the difference between a man who had been told about a place and a man who was standing inside one. "She closed the restaurant," he said quietly. She wanted quiet. I know what that means. He looked at the photographs again. My wife used to do that. When something mattered, she'd clear the space around it. He said it without apparent awareness that he was saying it, the way things come out when you're focused on something else. He stopped, seemed to register it, and moved on before the moment became something she needed to respond to. Vivian came through the kitchen door, and whatever Declan had expected, Mara had no idea what he'd expected. He got Vivian Cruz in a blue dress carrying a pot with the ease of someone who has carried pots most of their life. And he moved immediately and without being asked to hold the door for her, and then offered to take the pot, which Vivian declined with a brief but not unkind look that meant she had been managing pots before he was born and would manage them now. "Mr. Ashford," she said. "Mrs. Cruz." He put the wine on the table. "Thank you for having me." "I haven't decided yet whether I'm glad you're here," she said pleasantly. "Sit down. We eat first." He sat. He did not argue the sequence. They ate first. Vivian sat at the head of the table as though there had never been any other possible configuration, and she served portions with the practicality of someone who believed that people thought better when they weren't hungry. And she asked Declan questions that had nothing to do with real estate. Where had he grown up? What his father had done for work? Did his son like school? He answered everything without deflecting, which surprised Mara slightly. She'd expected the careful answers of a man used to controlling his image in conversations. Instead, he answered like someone who had decided before he arrived to be straightforward, and the result was that he sounded like an actual person rather than a managed presentation. His father had worked construction, it turned out, poured concrete mostly, for a regional contractor in Ohio. He'd put Declan through college on the back of 20 years of physical labor and retired with a bad knee and a lot of pride about it. Vivian listened to that with her head slightly tilted, the way she listened to everything, completely, without performing interest, just actually interested. "And now you build things," she said. "I finance things being built," he said. "There's a difference, is there?" "My father would say yes," Declan said. "Pretty strongly." A pause. Vivian topped off her water glass. "He sounds like a man who knew what things cost." "He did." Something moved across Declan's face that was too fast and too private to read. "He died 4 years ago. He never came to see any of the projects. I always thought he'd come eventually." He stopped. "I don't know why I'm telling you that." "Because it's true," Vivian said simply. "True things come out when people aren't performing." She looked at him steadily. "I'm going to tell you some things tonight. I want you to not perform either." He met her look. "All right. Good." She put her fork down. She was done eating. Mara across the table kept very still. "My husband built this kitchen, not professionally. He made a lot of mistakes, but he built it, and then for 30 years he cooked in it. And the reason the food here tastes the way it does is not because we have better ingredients than other places. It's because everything in that kitchen has history in it. You can't see it. You can't put it on a balance sheet. But the people who eat here feel it, even if they couldn't tell you what they're feeling." She looked at Declan. "When I die, I want the people who came here to still have somewhere to come. I want the woman who came in every Friday for 20 years to still have a bowl of soup waiting for her on Fridays. I want the man whose wife died in 2019 and who comes in every Sunday alone now because he can't be in his apartment on Sundays to still have a table." She paused. "A plaque tells those people that what they needed has been neatly processed and converted into something more valuable. It tells them what they loved was just a building." The room was very quiet. The candles did their small, indifferent work. Declan had his hands flat on the table, the way Mara had once stood with her hands flat on Danny's kitchen counter reading the letter from Marcus's attorneys, like he needed the surface, like he was keeping himself in contact with something solid while the rest shifted. "The current plan," he said, and stopped. "The current plan puts a plaque where those people's Fridays were," Vivian said. "Yes." He looked at Mara. She said nothing. This was not her moment to say something. He looked back at Vivian. "What would a real alternative look like? Not what you want preserved, what a real continuation would require." Vivian looked at him for a long moment, measuring something. "Space in whatever you build that actually functions as a restaurant, not a food court stall, not a branded throwback. A real space with a real kitchen that can be run the same way this one has been run. Reasonable lease terms that don't triple in year 3. Some form of permanent commitment.
legal, not good faith, that the space continues for at least 20 years. She folded her hands, and my name on it because it was mine. Not as a consolation, because it was mine. Declan was quiet. The quiet went on long enough that it had weight. That's possible, he said finally. Vivian didn't react with relief or gratitude. She just nodded once, as though she'd suspected as much and was simply having it confirmed. Then why hasn't anyone offered it? Because my team is focused on closing the acquisition, and the acquisition model doesn't account for long-term subsidized tenancy in ground floor commercial space. He said it with the flat honesty of a man accounting for his own failures. They optimize for the clean deal. This isn't a clean deal. No, Vivian agreed. It isn't. But that doesn't mean it's the wrong one. He looked at the room around them. The photographs, the jukebox, the second counter, the hand-lettered menu board. He looked at it the way Mara had looked at it the first time. The way a person looks at something they're beginning to understand the weight of. I want to bring someone in, a preservation attorney, not an acquisition attorney. I want to look at what a permanent legal protection agreement would require. He paused. I can't promise you the board approves it. I can tell you I'm going to push for it. Why? Vivian asked. He seemed slightly caught by the directness of the question. What do you mean? You have 6 other offers I've rejected. You could get a court order to proceed without my agreement within the year. Your attorneys have told you this. She looked at him without hostility, just with the absolute seriousness of a woman who had seen a lot of people say the right things for the wrong reasons. So why does this matter enough to fight your own board about it? Declan was quiet for a moment. Then, I have a 6-year-old son. His mother died 3 years ago. He said it simply, as a fact. I've spent 3 years being so focused on not falling apart that I built things and acquired things and expanded things, and I told myself that was providing for him. That legacy mattered. He looked at the table. Sitting in this restaurant, I think I've been measuring legacy wrong. The silence that followed was a different kind than the previous ones. Softer, more careful. Vivian looked at him for a long time. How old is your boy? 6. His name's Noah. Bring him sometime, she said. Not for business. Just bring him. Something in Declan's face that had been held carefully in place shifted and settled differently, the way a person looks when they've been tense for so long, they've forgotten what their face does without it. Yeah, he said. Okay. Mara sat between these two people and the evening and felt something that she didn't have a clean word for. Not happiness, the situation was too complicated for happiness, but something like rightness, like the conversation that had been trying to happen for 18 months had finally found the room it needed to happen in. Then her phone buzzed. She'd set it to silent, but she felt the vibration and glanced at the screen out of habit. Patricia Nguyen, at 8:30 p.m. on a Wednesday. She excused herself quietly and went to the back of the restaurant near the jukebox. I found it, Patricia said without preamble. Tell me. Greer Lund isn't just representing both sides coincidentally. Thomas Greer personally handles Marcus's business real estate work. They've worked together for 6 years. When Marcus filed for full custody, he specifically requested Greer's family law partner because of that existing relationship. That's not unusual. What's unusual is that Marcus filed the enhanced custody motion 48 hours after Greer Lund received instructions from Declan Ashford's board to escalate legal pressure on the Cruz property. She paused. I can't prove the timing is connected, but the 48 hours is a fact. Mara stood very still beside the jukebox. What are you saying? I'm saying that someone at Greer, Lund knew you'd been hired as a consultant on the Halstead project. And 48 hours after that became something the firm was positioned to know. Marcus filed an upgraded custody petition designed to destabilize you financially and legally. Another pause. It may be coincidence. The timing is tight enough that I'd be irresponsible not to flag it. Can you prove Marcus knew I was working for Declan? Not yet. I'm going to request the internal communications through discovery. If they used firm channels to share that information, we'll find it. Patricia's voice was careful, the voice of someone laying out information without telling you what to feel about it. There's another thing. The financial evaluator Marcus's team listed as a witness.
She has a prior professional relationship with Greer Lund. She's done expert testimony for them in 4 other cases. Mara looked across the restaurant at the table where Declan and Vivian were talking, the old woman's hands moving as she told something, Declan leaning slightly forward with his elbows on the table. A comfortable thing to witness if you didn't know what she'd just been told. "Patricia," she said, "can we fight this? If the discovery turns up what I think it might? Yes. Compellingly." A pause. "But Mara, you need to tell Declan Ashford about this. If his board has been leveraging his legal team against a consultant he hired without his knowledge, he deserves to know. And if he didn't know, you see, if this was the board operating independently, then you both have a problem that's bigger than one custody hearing." She hung up and stood by the jukebox for a moment, looking at nothing. Then she went back to the table. Vivian read her face the way she'd read it the first day. "Sit down," she said. "I'm all right." "You're not all right. Sit down." Mara sat. Declan looked at her with the same alerting expression she'd seen on Halstead streets, the one that meant he was registering that the ground had shifted and was waiting to understand how. "I need to tell you something," she said to him, "and I need you to hear it without reacting immediately." "That's not a great setup," he said. "No, it isn't." She looked at him steadily. "The law firm your board has been using to manage the cruise acquisition, Greer, Lund, they're also representing my ex-husband in his custody petition for my daughter." Declan went very still. "I thought it was coincidence," she continued. "My attorney looked deeper. The timing of when Marcus filed the upgraded custody motion, the one asking for full primary custody with supervised visitation, matches to within 48 hours of when Greer, Lund received board instructions to escalate legal pressure on this property." She paused. "Someone at that firm knew I'd been hired by you. The question is who told them and whether Marcus knew the connection when he filed." Declan's face had gone through several things very quickly and was now in the specific stillness of a man who is making a significant effort to process something before he speaks. "My board knew I hired you," he said slowly. "Yes." "They knew before anyone else?" "Yes." The silence at the table was very different from the earlier silences. Vivian sat at the head of it without speaking, but her eyes moved between them with the attentiveness of someone who has witnessed enough of the human situation to know when something real is happening and not to interrupt it. "2 members of my board have a long-standing relationship with Greer, Lund," Declan said. He said it like he was putting together something he already had the pieces of and just hadn't arranged in this particular configuration before. "They recommended the firm for the acquisition work. I didn't select them." He stopped. "I'm going to need to make some calls. Patricia is filing discovery requests. If the communication happened on firm channels, it did," he said flatly. "They're not careless, but they're also not used to thinking that I'd ever look for it." A pause. "They've been managing this acquisition the way they manage everything, efficiently, without thinking about what it costs." He looked at the table. "They used your custody situation as leverage to pressure you out of the consultant position or to destabilize the access you had to—" He stopped himself. His jaw was tight. "I'm sorry." "Don't apologize to me," Mara said. "Fix it." He looked at her. "I don't need your apology," she said. "I need the discovery to show what it shows, and I need you to not do anything that disrupts the legal process before it shows it. Can you do that?" "Yes." A pause. "And the board, what about them?" He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet she'd started to recognize as genuine thinking rather than strategic delay. "The Halstead project has been 5 years in development. Without board approval, I can't commit to the preservation agreement with Vivian. Without that approval, I also can't protect the project from what they'll do to it if I move against them on the legal issue." He looked at Vivian. "I need time to handle this in the right sequence." Vivian had been listening to all of this with her hands folded on the table and her face entirely composed. "How much time?" she asked. 2 weeks. She looked at him. "You have one." He almost smiled. 1 week. "And the boy's custody matter?" Vivian looked at Mara, not asking if Mara would be okay. She was past that kind of question, asking what was needed. "The hearing is in 5 weeks," Mara said.
If Patricia gets the discovery back in time, we'll have what we need to expose the manipulation. If the board's communication is in those records, she stopped. Then Marcus's entire case collapses. Because what he filed wasn't about Lily's welfare. It was about using his connections to squeeze someone who was inconveniencing a business deal. The words sat in the room. Lily, the name she hadn't said aloud tonight until now. Vivian reached across the table and put one hand over Mara's briefly. She didn't squeeze it dramatically, just let it rest there for 1 second, and then withdrew because she was not a woman who lingered in gestures. Then you both have work to do, Vivian said. She stood, began gathering plates with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone closing out an evening. The food was good tonight, she added, to neither of them in particular. It's always better when it matters who you're feeding. Declan stood to help her. She let him carry the pot. Mara sat at the table for a moment longer, among the candles and the photographs and the second counter and the hand-lettered menu that had not changed its layout in decades. And she thought about the particular way this evening had arrived. As a dinner, as a negotiation, as a revelation, as three people discovering that the thing each of them was fighting for had more connections to the other two than any of them had understood coming in. She thought about Lily and the drawer that was waiting for her in the Sutter Street apartment. She thought about Patricia Nguyen and what 48 hours meant, and what discovery documents might say. She thought about Declan standing at the head of a board meeting he hadn't yet had, preparing to tell a group of powerful men that the way they'd been operating was over, knowing it would cost him their support for the project, and possibly more. She thought about what Vivian had said earlier, about not believing in things working out, about believing in not stopping. From the kitchen, she could hear the sound of a pot being set down, a cabinet closing, two voices, Declan's low register and Vivian's practical one, exchanging something too quiet to make out. Just sound, just the ordinary noise of two people at the end of a meal, putting things away together without making a ceremony of it. She blew out the nearest candle and left it to smoke. Then she got up from the table and went to help. The discovery documents arrived on a Friday morning, 9 days after Patricia had filed the requests. Mara was at the Sutter Street apartment when Patricia called, sitting on the floor of the bedroom because the bed frame she'd ordered was 2 days late, eating cereal from a bowl balanced on her knee, doing the kind of mundane thing that life insists on regardless of what's pending. She'd learned in the last several weeks that the waiting didn't pause anything else. Bills still came. Shifts still started. The spring in Danny's pull-out couch had been replaced, in her memory, by the particular way her new floor felt under a sleeping bag, which was better, but still not what most people would call comfortable. She put the cereal down when she heard Patricia's voice. "We have it," Patricia said. "All of it." The document showed what Patricia had suspected and more. An email thread inside Greer, Lund's internal system, subpoenaed through the discovery process with the help of a judge who had looked at the timing and agreed that it warranted examination, showed a conversation between a senior partner at the firm and Marcus's personal contact there. The thread was dated 2 days after Declan's board had confirmed Mara's consulting engagement to the firm. The language was careful, the way careful people write when they think they're being careful enough. Not explicit. Not "let's use her custody case to pressure her off this project." More like, "worth noting that M. Bennett has a pending family matter that could become more complicated. TG thinks the timing of an escalated filing might be worth discussing with your client." And then, 2 emails later, Marcus responding, "Understood. Let's move forward." It wasn't a smoking gun in the movie sense. It wasn't a confession. But it was 2 people coordinating the escalation of a custody filing against a woman they both had professional reason to want destabilized, and the timing made the purpose unmistakable. "This is enough," Patricia said. "More than enough. I'm filing a motion to introduce this into the custody proceedings today. I'm also filing a complaint against Greer, Lund with the state bar for conflict of interest violations. They were simultaneously representing opposing interests in interconnected legal matters without disclosure." What does it mean for the hearing? It means Marcus's entire case just lost its foundation. The financial instability argument, the request for supervised visitation, the upgraded custody petition, all of it was filed in coordination with a party who had a financial interest in undermining you. A judge is going to look at that and see a man who weaponized his daughter's custody arrangement for a business advantage. Patricia paused. "Mara, he's not going to win this."
She sat on the floor of her half-furnished bedroom for a long moment after they hung up. She didn't feel what she'd expected to feel. She'd expected relief or triumph or something clean and satisfying. What she actually felt was tired, and then underneath the tired, something quieter. A kind of grief for the version of her marriage she'd once believed in, for the man Marcus had seemed to be in the early years before she understood who he actually was when things didn't go his way. You could be angry at someone and still grieve what you'd thought they were. She was learning those two things weren't mutually exclusive. She called Declan. He picked up on the second ring. She'd noticed he always did that now. First or second ring, no more. She didn't know when that had started. "Patricia got the documents," she said. A pause. "And?" "It's what we thought. They coordinated the filing timing. Marcus's contact at Greer Lund flagged my consulting position, and they moved on the custody escalation deliberately." She heard him exhale slowly. "Patricia is filing with the court today." "I need to tell you something," he said, "about the board meeting." She had been waiting for this. He'd called an emergency board session 3 days ago and told her only that it was happening, not what the outcome was, which she'd taken as a sign that the outcome was still uncertain. "Tell me." "I presented the preservation agreement first. The full terms: permanent protected tenancy for cruises in the new development, subsidized lease structure, the legal framework that makes it binding for 20 years minimum. The board voted against it, 7-2. She closed her eyes briefly. "Declan, I'm not finished." His voice was steady, the particular steadiness she'd come to recognize as the sound of a decision already made. "I then exercised my founder's override provision. It's in the original company charter. I've never used it before. It requires me to personally absorb the financial difference between the approved development model and the modified one." He paused. "The preservation agreement is now binding. Vivian signed it this morning." The silence lasted several seconds. "You overrode your own board," she said. "Yes." "What does that cost you?" He was quiet for a moment. "The projected return on the Halstead project drops significantly. Several board members will push to restructure my role. I'll probably spend the next 18 months in internal battles over the company's direction." A pause. "It costs me a lot. It doesn't cost me the company if I handle the next part carefully. And if you don't handle it carefully, then it costs me more." He said it without self-pity, without drama. Just the accounting of a man who had decided what something was worth and was prepared to pay it. "I keep thinking about what my father would say. He spent 20 years pouring other people's concrete. He knew what things actually cost to build. Not the number on the contract, but what it took out of the people doing the work." A pause. He would have hated the plaque idea. Mara thought about a man she'd never met, in Ohio, with a bad knee and 20 years of pride, and she thought about the way Declan had said he never came to see any of the projects at Vivian's dinner table. The particular weight of that sentence. "He would have liked the second counter," she said. A pause on his end. "Yeah." Something in his voice had shifted, quieter, less managed. "He would have." She gave him a moment, then, "The board restructuring, is your position actually at risk?" "Honestly, less than I thought it would be when I made the decision. 2 members who voted against it have been with me since the beginning. I think they voted no as a procedural objection, not because they actually want to go to war with me over it. The other 5 are more complicated." He paused. "I'm handling it. It's going to be loud for a while, but I'm handling it." "Okay," she said. "How are you?" he asked. It was a simple question, and he asked it simply, not as a pivot or a pleasantry, just as its own thing, and the simplicity of it was what got her. She'd been asked a version of it constantly for the past 2 months. By Danny, by Patricia, by coworkers at Rosie's who'd noticed she was operating under pressure, and she'd answered it the same way each time. The efficient way, the fine I'm managing way. She didn't do that now. "I'm tired," she said. "I'm really tired, but I think I'm going to be all right." "That's different from fine," he said. "It is," she agreed. "It's better than fine. Fine is what you say when you don't want to have the conversation. All right is what you say when you actually believe it." She heard something that might have been a quiet laugh. "When does the hearing get rescheduled?" "Patricia thinks 3 weeks. The court has to process the new filings." She looked at the bedroom window. Brick wall, as advertised, but this morning it had a square of pale sunlight on it that was doing its best.
My daughter is coming Saturday, first overnight.
At the new apartment. At the new apartment. She paused. She gets her own drawer. He was quiet for a moment in a way that felt warm rather than empty. That's a good start. That's what she said, Mom. The hearing was rescheduled for a Thursday, 3 weeks and 2 days after Patricia filed the motion. It was not the dramatic courtroom scene that Mara had braced for. No speeches, no tearful moments that changed everything, no single instant of visible justice. Real hearings rarely worked like that. What happened was quieter and more procedural and ultimately more complete. Marcus's attorneys requested a continuance when the discovery documents were entered. The judge denied it. Greer Lund withdrew from the case 4 days before the hearing, citing conflict of interest, likely ahead of the bar complaint, likely on advice from their own counsel. And Marcus appeared with a hastily retained replacement attorney who had had 72 hours to review a case file that took 6 weeks to build. It showed. Patricia presented the email thread. She presented the timeline. She presented the fact that the financial evaluator Marcus's team had listed as a witness had a prior professional relationship with the firm that had coordinated the filing strategy. She did it without drama, in the flat sequential language of documented fact, which was considerably more devastating than drama would have been. Marcus sat at his table in a different shirt than last time. This one less confident, or maybe it was the same shirt and he was less confident, and that was what changed. He looked older. He'd always been good-looking in a maintained way, the way of a man who understands his appearance as a professional asset and treats it accordingly. He looked, for the first time in Mara's experience of him, like someone who had miscalculated and was sitting inside the miscalculation trying to figure out which direction the exit was. She didn't feel triumphant watching him. She'd thought she would. She'd spent some of the 2 a.m. hours imagining this moment and finding satisfaction in it, the way you do when you're running on inadequate sleep and legitimate grievance. The actual moment was different. He was the father of her daughter, and that was a fact that didn't simplify no matter how much she wished it did. What she felt was not triumph, but something more durable, the particular solidity of having told the truth in the right room at the right time and having been believed. The judge ruled from the bench. The upgraded custody petition was denied. The preliminary arrangement from the original decree was restored and modified in Mara's favor. Primary residence with Lily, Marcus retaining regular visitation on a structured schedule. The supervised visitation request was not only denied but noted in the record as having been filed without evidentiary basis, which was the judicial equivalent of a raised eyebrow that would follow Marcus into any future proceedings. Outside the courthouse, a different courthouse than the one where she'd walked out in August with $43, but close enough in geography that she could see that parking lot from the steps, Patricia shook her hand and said, "That's done," in the voice of someone who meant it completely and had no interest in embellishment. "Thank you," Mara said. "You did the work," Patricia said. "I just filed the papers." That wasn't entirely true, but Mara accepted it as the kind of generous simplification that people offer when they mean something generous rather than something accurate. She accepted it the way she'd been learning to accept things, without deflecting it entirely, but without letting it replace her own understanding of what had actually happened. What had actually happened was that she had made a decision in a diner on Clement Street to pick up a handwritten index card instead of putting it down, and that decision had set in motion a sequence of events that had been painful and complicated and had required her to be honest with people in moments when it would have been considerably easier to manage them instead. That was the work. The papers were the papers. She called Danny from the courthouse steps, which felt like the right order of things. "It's over?" Danny said. "It's over." A sound that was somewhere between a shout and a word, then, "Get over here. I'm making food." "I have to get Lily first." "Bring her. Obviously, bring her." A pause. "Mara." "Yeah. I'm really proud of you." She held that for a moment on the courthouse steps, in the October air, which had finally decided to behave like October, the heat of the summer gone and the sky doing something clean and particular above the city. "Thank you for the couch," she said. "The spring was sticking up by the end. I know it was." "Only after the second night. By then I'd mapped it." Danny laughed. "Get your daughter, Ichi-san." Cruises reopened on a Saturday in November, 6 weeks after the preservation agreement was signed and recorded and legally bulletproofed by the preservation attorney Declan had brought in. A woman named Reyes, who had done this kind of work for 20 years and who had looked at the agreement Vivian signed and said, "This is binding in a way most of these aren't," with the specific satisfaction of someone who'd seen too many of the ones that weren't. The reopening was not a grand event.
Vivian had declined 3 offers from local press and one from a lifestyle website that wanted to do a feature on neighborhood gems preserved through community advocacy, which was not inaccurate, but was also not a framing Vivian had any patience for. She opened the door at 11 a.m. on a Saturday the way she'd opened it every Saturday for 40 years, put the sign to open, and started the coffee. By noon, the place was full, not because of any announcement, but because people knew. The woman who came every Friday came on Saturday instead, because she'd heard it was open and couldn't wait until Friday. The man who came on Sundays alone came with someone's. His sister, it turned out, whom he hadn't seen in 2 years, and whom he'd called because he wanted to show her the place. The young man who'd been eating with a textbook the first day Mara came in sat at the counter with a different textbook, studying for something that mattered to him, in the place where the table held still and the coffee stayed warm. Mara was there. She'd come with Lily, who had been promised a grilled cheese and had received it and was now regarding the jukebox with the focused interest of a 6-year-old who has been told it plays real songs and wants to verify this claim personally. "Does it cost money?" Lily asked Vivian. "Not today," Vivian said. Lily selected something she found by pressing buttons at random, which produced a song from 1974 that neither she nor Mara knew, but which Vivian appeared to recognize, because she stopped what she was doing for a moment and listened to it with an expression that had 50 years of something in it. "Ernesto's song," she said, to herself more than anyone. Lily looked at her. "Who's Ernesto?" "My husband." "Where is he?" "He's gone." Vivian looked at the child with the directness she brought to everything. "But that was his song. So today he's in the jukebox." Lily considered this with the seriousness that children apply to information about death and absence, which is generally more seriousness than adults expect. "That's okay," she decided. "The jukebox is good." "It is," Vivian agreed. "Go eat your sandwich." Declan arrived at 12:30 with Noah. The boy was 6, as advertised, dark-haired like his father, with his father's quality of taking in a room seriously before engaging with it, but without the learned restraint yet, so it expressed itself differently, as genuine wide-eyed attention rather than calculated assessment. He stood inside the door of Cruises and looked at the photographs and the jukebox and the counter and the full room of people, and his face was simply and completely interested. Noah looked at Lily, who was still near the jukebox. Lily looked at him. "Do you want to pick a song?" Lily asked. It was an offer and also a test, because the jukebox was currently in her jurisdiction and she was deciding whether to extend it. "What kind of songs does it have?" Noah asked. "Old ones, but they're good. The lady said so." He considered this. "Okay." They went to look at it together. Declan stood near the door and watched his son walk across a restaurant he'd almost demolished toward a jukebox in the corner, and his face did the thing Mara had seen it do twice before. The thing where something underneath the management came up and was visible for a moment before he could organize it. This time he didn't organize it quickly. This time he let it stay for a few seconds, and she thought that was its own kind of progress. She handed him a coffee. Black, no sugar, because she'd been right the first time, and he'd been wrong, and they both knew it now. "How's the board situation?" she asked. "Loud," he said. "Manageable." He accepted the coffee. 2 of the 7 have come around. The others are in various stages of being difficult about it. He paused. "I restructured the development finance model this week. Found an efficiency in the construction phasing that offsets most of the cost difference from the preservation agreement. When I showed it to the board, 2 more came around." He said it without smugness, just as information. "Turns out when you look harder, you find things that weren't visible when you were looking for something else." "Your father's concrete," she said. He looked at her. "What?" "Knowing what things actually cost to build. That's what that is." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Yeah, maybe." Vivian appeared from the kitchen, saw Declan, gave him the same look she'd given him at the dinner table. Measuring, patient, unimpressed by anything other than what he actually did. "You came," she said.
You told me to bring him sometime. Her eyes moved to Noah at the jukebox, then back to Declan. Something in her expression softened by 1 degree, which on Vivian was considerable. Sit down, she said. I'll bring food. You don't have to. I cook for everyone who sits at my tables, she said, and went back to the kitchen. Mara sat across from Declan at the table, and they drank their coffees, and from the jukebox came a song, 1968 by the sound of it, something with a trumpet, that neither of them knew, but that filled the room with the particular warmth of music that has been played in the same space enough times that it sounds like it belongs there. Noah and Lily had moved on from the jukebox and were now engaged in something that appeared to be a negotiation over one of the counter stools, conducted with the pragmatic seriousness of early childhood diplomacy. She's getting primary residence, Declan said. She is. Mara looked at her daughter. The drawer was already there. I got the bed frame last week, so now there's an actual bed. She paused. She told me the room is small, but the soup is good. She's been back? 3 times. Vivian taught her how to stir the rice. She smiled, and it was a real one, not the efficient kind she'd been distributing for months, but something with actual warmth in it, the kind that comes from the specific relief of things having gone right after a long period of them going wrong. Lily thinks Vivian is, quote, very serious, but also funny sometimes. That's accurate, Declan said. It is. They were quiet for a moment. A comfortable quiet. The kind that doesn't need filling, that means 2 people are in the same place at the same time without either of them performing being in the same place. Mara had forgotten, or maybe had never quite known, what that felt like. What's the leadership role? Declan asked. The one you mentioned to Patricia. She'd told Patricia about it in passing and had apparently mentioned it in something that got back to him through some channel she hadn't tracked. She found she didn't mind. The Halstead Corridor project is going to need a community liaison during the development phase. Someone who actually understands the neighborhood, who can identify what needs protecting before it gets to the stage where the only option is a preservation agreement or a plaque. She paused. Vivian suggested me. You apparently agreed. 3 weeks ago, I was waiting for you to bring it up. I was waiting to be sure I wanted it. And? She looked at the room. At Vivian's kitchen door, at the photographs on the walls, at the second counter, at the hand-lettered menu board, at 2 6-year-olds who had resolved their stool negotiation apparently through some form of shared governance and were now both sitting on adjacent stools eating cookies that Vivian had produced from somewhere without being asked. It's a real position, she said. Not consulting. Not temporary. Permanent. With actual authority to stop things before they become situations I have to override my board about. A pause. I'd rather build the process than keep fixing it after. She thought about Patricia's warning back in the beginning. Be careful about this arrangement. She thought about what the arrangement had turned into and whether careful was still the right word for what it required. Something more deliberate than careful. Something more like intentional. Knowing what you were choosing and why, and being willing to account for it. I want the scope in writing again, she said. You'll get it. And I want reporting authority that doesn't run through the board members who were difficult about Vivian. Done. And I want to keep the diner shifts on weekends. He looked at her. I'm serious, she said. I know what it is to need tips to make rent, and I'm not going to forget it the minute I have a salary. The regulars are there on weekends. I'm not leaving them. She paused. Also, Rosie makes the best pie on Clement Street, and I want access to it. He looked at her for a moment with an expression that had started to become familiar, the one where he was reassessing something and finding it better than the previous assessment. All right, he said. The diner stays. From the kitchen, Vivian called something in Spanish. A young man came through the dining room in response, carrying a tray. Lunch arrived at their table, rice and stew and the bread that had been baked that morning, in the portions of someone who believed that people thought better when they weren't hungry. Noah came back from the counter and slid into a chair and looked at the food with the expression of a child who has been well fed in his life, but is still, at 6, capable of genuine enthusiasm about a meal. Is this the soup? He asked. It's the stew, Mara said. It's better. He tried it. Made the face of someone discovering this was accurate. Lily came and sat beside Mara and leaned into her arm in the unself-conscious way she had when she was comfortable somewhere, and Mara put one hand on her daughter's head without thinking about it, which was the best way, the not thinking about it way. The way things feel when they've settled into the place they belong. Outside, Halstead Street went about its November business. The construction crane 3 blocks north had been paused for the winter, waiting for the revised development timeline. The 2 empty buildings on the block still had their paper over the windows, but there was a notice on one of them now, a preservation review filed by a community liaison position that had just been made permanent, covering 3 properties on the Halstead corridor that warranted assessment before any development decision was made. The sign above Cruz's door said what it had said for 40 years. The brick was old, and the security bars on the windows had never been removed, and the jukebox was playing something that belonged to a dead man who had cried over a counter and then built it right the second time. None of it was perfect. The board members who were being difficult were still being difficult, and would probably be difficult for a while longer. Marcus would not disappear simply because he'd lost. He'd remain Lily's father and Mara's problem in the specific and ongoing way that only co-parenting with someone you no longer trust could be. The apartment on Sutter Street still had off-white walls. Declan still had shadows under his eyes that hadn't fully resolved, and probably wouldn't for some time, because grief doesn't have a development timeline you can put in a presentation. People don't come out of hard things fixed. They come out changed, which is different. The hard thing leaves marks, and the marks become part of the structure, and the structure is what holds the next thing. Mara understood that now in a way she hadn't when she'd walked out of a courthouse in August with a ruined folder and $43 and a blister forming on her left heel. She'd thought then that the goal was to get back to before, back to stable, back to safe, back to the life she'd had before it fell apart. She understood now that before wasn't a place you got back to. You built forward, or you didn't build at all. She had a lease signed in her name. She had her daughter beside her. She had work that was worth doing with people who had proven, under actual pressure, that they meant what they said. That was not everything, but it was the beginning of something that had the structural integrity to hold more weight than she'd been carrying alone. The stew was good. The bread was better. The jukebox played something none of them knew, and Lily decided she liked it anyway. And outside the window, the city went on being a city, difficult and ongoing and full of things worth preserving if you were willing to look hard enough before it was too late to see them.